In 2009, during a strained period of U.S.-North Korea relations, Ambassador Robert King was confirmed as the special envoy for North Korean human rights issues. Ambassador King held this position until January 2017, making him the longest-serving envoy in this position since its creation in 2004. He collaborated with the United Nations, the White House, and other organizations to improve human rights conditions in North Korea. But his experience with the Hermit Kingdom began even before his work at the U.S. State Department.
When I was serving as Chief of Staff to Congressman Tom Lantos and when I was Staff Director of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, we became involved in some of the issues related to North Korea. My first trip to North Korea was in January of 2005. North Korea was a very less developed place. It was not a place where there was a lot of resources available for energy. We stayed in a hotel for government officials. The only part of the hotel that was heated were in the rooms. You could actually see your breath as you were walking down the halls in the hotel. But it was an indication of what life was like in North Korea. If this is what it was like for important guests, the average man in the street in North Korea, and particularly those outside Pyongyang, were living under much worse conditions. At the time, we had been working on the North Korea Human Rights Act. There was an interest in re-engaging with North Korea on some of the security issues. And Congressman Lantos felt like he wanted to go to North Korea and give a congressional perspective on the interest in getting North Korea re-engaged with the United States and make progress on denuclearization and improving relations and so forth. He was in his late 70s at the time, and one of the comments the North Koreans made is that you're coming here to talk to us on these issues at this time of year and at your age says this is important to you, and we recognize and acknowledge that. We had a series of meetings with a number of prominent North Korean leaders. We met with Kim Dae-kwon, who was one of the principal leaders in dealing with the United States at the time. And we had a very productive series of conversations. The focus was fairly broad because one of the main things that Lantos was trying to encourage the North Koreans to do was to re-engage with the United States and move towards making progress on agreements in the security area. But Tom Lantos also was a very outspoken advocate on human rights issues. He was a survivor of the Holocaust, had been a leading voice in Congress on human rights issues, and he wanted to engage with the North Koreans on human rights, access to information, prison camps, and so forth. There were issues that were important, but he was the kind of person that could do this in a very polite way without challenging or threatening North Korea. And this was done shortly after the Congress had adopted the North Korea Human Rights Act and raised these issues of human rights and put them on the agenda for the United States in terms of our foreign policy.
With the U.S. initiating its own efforts to address North Korea's human rights issues, they sought international support as well.
The United Nations was one of the key elements in terms of dealing with U.S. efforts to improve human rights conditions in North Korea. The United Nations has stature and status internationally. The United Nations was also important to North Korea. It was an important symbol of its full recognition. The UN Human Rights Council is the focal point of human rights activity inside the United Nations. The United States had withdrawn from participation in the UN Human Rights Council under the George W. Bush administration. And one of the things that had happened is about the time that I was nominated to be Special Envoy for North Korea human rights issues, the United States had re-engaged, had made the decision to return to participation in the UN Human Rights Council, and we were elected to membership. I was very warmly welcomed by the Human Rights Council. It was a sign the United States was re-engaging with the UN on these human rights issues. It was important. The North Koreans were taking this very seriously. One of the things that we tried to do through the United Nations is continue pressing North Korea on its human rights activities. The UN had created a special rapporteur, the French term which means reporter. The special rapporteur issued a report every year, began in 2004 with a resolution that was adopted in the Human Rights Council, calling on North Korea to make progress on human rights. And this became a major focal point of my efforts of encouraging tougher language, stronger statements, greater focus on the real problems of human rights in North Korea.
One of the challenges Ambassador King faced was that there were often competing interests in U.S. efforts to engage North Korea.
Non-government organizations began a process about 2009, 2010, to encourage the United Nations to create a commission of inquiry to look at North Korea's human rights problem. And this was an effort to try to increase the pressure on North Korea and identify more clearly the problems. We were very much involved in terms of the discussion about whether to create a commission of inquiry. There were those who argued, we shouldn't do that. It's going to take away from our efforts to try to press the North Koreans on nuclear issues. We argued that we needed to press the North Koreans on human rights issues as well as on the nuclear issue. And it took a little while, but within the United States government there was eventually a shifting of position that yes, we should support a commission of inquiry. Michael Kirby, who's a former justice of the Australian equivalent of our Supreme Court, and somebody who had been involved in a number of other UN actions on human rights, was designated as chairman of the commission. Marzuki Darusman, who was the special rapporteur on North Korea human rights at the time, a former Indonesian Attorney General who was involved in prosecuting some of the war criminals in Indonesia, was also named a member of the commission. And then Sonja Bezerko, who was a human rights activist, former foreign service officer in the Serbian government, who had a very strong reputation in human rights, was the third member of the commission. We met with them. The commission conducted a series of the equivalent of what we would call a congressional hearing, basically an investigative discussion. But the creation of the Commission of Inquiry really ratcheted up a notch the attention, the focus, the concern about North Korean human rights issues. And this Commission of Inquiry was a major step forward in terms of making progress. And the Commission is limited to 30 pages for its report. So the Commission very skillfully drafted a summary which took 30 pages, and then included another several hundred pages of documentation and details specifying the violations of human rights that North Korea was involved in. And these were detailed, specific information that one could look at and know that the documentation was there and the charges were in fact accurate. And it was a damning document for the North Koreans. This effort with the Human Rights Council and the Commission of Inquiry gave special emphasis and focus to this issue. One of the things that we tried to do was to give it more attention by raising the issue of North Korea human rights and the Commission of Inquiry report to the level of the Security Council. A Security Council discussion can be held on a topic if 9 of the 15 Security Council members agree that it should be raised. At the time, the U.S. representative in the Security Council was Samantha Powers, and Ambassador Powers was very much an ally in the effort to get this put on the Security Council agenda. We were able to work very closely with a number of other countries who are members of the Security Council. We made the argument that North Korea's human rights record was such an appalling record that it was a threat to peace and security because of what it might do and what the threat that it posed. And we were able to get the 9 members of the Security Council to call for a discussion. The other countries participated in that discussion. South Korea was one of the temporary members of the Security Council. The ambassador was a member of the Security Council, was leaving that December. He gave an incredibly good speech, raising concerns and questions about North Korea, the human rights conditions there.
But I'm saying this with a heavy heart because for South Koreans, people in North Korea are not just anybody's. Millions of South Koreans still have our family members and relatives living in the North. We cannot read what is described in the COI report without it breaking our hearts. We cannot watch video clips from North Korea without flinching at every scene. We cannot listen to stories of North Korean defectors without sharing in their tears, without feeling as if we are there with them experiencing the tragedies.
It was very important to have that element as a part of this discussion in the Security Council because of the passion and the personal sense of concern that the South Korean government and the ambassador in particular felt about the issues that were being discussed in terms of North Korea's human rights record. This was December of 2014. We were able to raise the issue again in 2015 and 2016. In 2017, the Trump administration was successful at pulling together the necessary 9 votes to get the issue taken up by the Security Council. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has not followed through since then. They have abandoned North Korea human rights as an issue of focus, and the Security Council has not had this discussion since 2017. The United States has also since withdrawn from participation in the UN Human Rights Council under the Trump administration, and it's unfortunate because in terms of dealing with North Korean human rights issues, the UN has been a most effective means of pressing the North Koreans for progress on human rights, and it's been one of the most important things that we've been able to do.
But the U.S. Special Envoy also plays an important role.
I very much think that the Special Envoy is a critical part of our effort to press the North Koreans on human rights. Unfortunately, the Obama administration was the last administration to appoint the Special Envoy for North Korea human rights. We're now 3.5 years into the Trump administration. There has been no Special Envoy appointed. The irony is the requirement for appointment of a Special Envoy for North Korea human rights issues is in law. The North Korea Human Rights Act says there shall be appointed a representative to do this. The law was extended in 2017, the reauthorization of the North Korea Human Rights Act with the requirement for a special envoy. 3.5 years, we're still waiting for someone to be appointed. The Trump administration has tended to use human rights, in the case of North Korea, as a stick that you beat the North Koreans when you're trying to get them to do something. Trump raised all sorts of human rights issues before the first summit with Kim Jong-un. In his first State of the Union address, almost 10% was devoted to Korea issues.
But no regime has oppressed its own citizens more totally or brutally than the cruel dictatorship in North Korea.
And high on that list of Korea issues was the issue of North Korea human rights. Sitting with Melania Trump in the gallery of the House of Representatives when the State of the Union address was given were several North Korean defectors, including a very prominent North Korean defector who lost both of his legs when he left North Korea. He was acknowledged by the president from the podium.
Your great sacrifice is an inspiration to us all. Please, thank you.
People were encouraged that maybe the Trump administration was going to give some attention and focus to North Korea human rights. In March, Trump accepted a proposal to have a summit meeting with Kim Jong-un, and since that time, no word about human rights has escaped the president's lips. Human rights is not on the agenda. There are still human rights things that are done because they're required by law. Not all of those required by law are done, but some of those that are done are handled at a very low level, and certainly not at the White House level. It's important that we have White House support. It's important that the president recognize and acknowledge that that is a part of our relationship with North Korea, and that human rights is an important element of United States foreign policy.